My name is David Sobel. I am a professor at Brown University, and I'm also the director of undergraduate studies here in the Department of Cognitive and Psychological Sciences. I've been at Brown for 24 years, and my field of study is developmental psychology, specifically cognitive development. So I study children's causal reasoning. Over the years, I've done work on selective learning, I've done work on prosocial behavior, and now I'm doing a lot of work on parent-child interaction and how parents can support their children's both learning about causal reasoning, causal inferences, and that really relates to their sort of scientific reasoning, as well as their engagement with science. And I would say that's kind of where my lab is right now. These are kind of two hexagons and one sort of totally different object. So let's say I just show you these objects, and I take this one and I put it on our Blickett detector.
A Blickett detector is a machine used in experiments with children to study how they infer cause and effect. Children are asked to figure out which objects, called Blickets, activate the machine, helping researchers understand how kids form causal hypotheses.
And what we found was that even very young children, 4-year-olds, would pick this object. They would pick the object that shared the causal properties as opposed to the perceptual properties. So this suggested that they were paying attention to those causal features. We did a whole bunch of experiments subsequently looking at this phenomena of screening off, and more generally, the idea that children can recognize the conditional probabilities and the interventional structure of the world. And that allowed us to kind of document what children knew about sort of causal structure and their causal reasoning abilities. Children are natural explorers. So one of the things that we very clearly see is the fact that if you present children with just a novel causal system, they want to explore it. They are engaged by the act of exploring. What we also see is that depending on how old they are and depending on kind of the nature of the exhibit, they also need support. And usually that support comes from parents. So probably my favorite study in all of the lines of work we've done on museums, we went to 3 museums around the United States. What was great about these museums was that they all had a very, very similar exhibit about gears. And so we just looked at how children would play at the gear exhibit with their parents. And we found 2 things that I think are incredibly important. First was that if you just look at how parents and children play together, there's natural behaviors, sequences of action on the part of children that predict their causal reasoning, that predict how good they are at understanding gear structure. So the more children engage in certain actions related to gear construction and sort of hypothesis testing, the better they were at reasoning about gears when they were tested on their own in more of kind of a classroom testing session. The other thing that we found is that there are ways parents can support those behaviors. One of the things that we measured was just how much do parents talk about the causality related to gears. And it turns out that that didn't matter. But what did matter was when the parent generated a causal utterance. If a parent started a causal utterance during the first 5 seconds, the child was much more likely to complete the exploratory sequence. Our control was if the parent started the causal utterance 5 seconds before or 5 seconds after, the trial didn't show that effect. I would hypothesize that if teachers gave causal language right at the start of those exploratory sequences, it would actually facilitate the students' learning. Brown is a small university. Campus itself is about, I don't know, 5 or 6 blocks square. There are 3 developmental laboratories and a waiting room that we have set up for families to come in. One of the researchers is an infant researcher, so he brings in really infants and toddlers. And then myself and another researcher across the hall, we both work with preschoolers and, up to about maybe 8 or 10 years old. So. Piece of advice that I would give students is not to be afraid of 2 things. Not to be afraid of not knowing something. And much more importantly, not to be afraid of failing.